of the foreign ministry.
We were ordered off the air.
And if you give the command to my colleague, he will shut us down.
These are the last pictures we saw from China. They were transmitted night before last.
I know not when. This is Dan Rather, CBS News, Beijing.
We weren't told that this was about to happen, and suddenly that's exactly what happened. So meanwhile, we are continuing to try to change the minds of the foreign ministry people who have suddenly arrived here at the CBS headquarters saying that our satellite is no longer operable. We will have to stop broadcasting from China. The gentleman in the middle is Lane Bernardos, who's in charge of our special events coverage. He's been in charge of the coverage here. As we said before, everything has been done strictly by the book. By the book, there is no reason for this.
Agreement with the foreign ministry. I think we ought to have something in writing that says the agreement is now broken.
The effort to persuade by an attention to detail it seems to be falling on deaf ears. I've just been told that another gentleman from CCTV is making an attempt to come into the CBS control room and shut off all of our receivers while this discussion goes on. So if we suddenly go off the air, it certainly won't be any mystery as to what's happened. These events of attempting to impose a complete news blackout follows a very ominous and strange occurrence down at the square about an hour ago. A group of helicopters, unclear whether they were military helicopters, civilian helicopters, what they were, or what they were doing, but they made several flybys over Tiananmen Square, where thousands of people are still defying the government, staying in the square. You can hear the sound of ambulances and sirens that has gone on throughout the day and night. Troops who have attempted to get in the square, or at least made a half-hearted attempt to get in the square, were turned away by crowds. In fact, before they left, they ended up embracing some of the people in the crowd. So it seems that the government has decided that if it is unable to call its own troops to control its people, at least doesn't want anyone to know about it. We are now back in our own hallway here at CBS headquarters, where the negotiations with the foreign ministry are continuing. And they seem to be getting a little bit more heated. These people have told us they're from the foreign ministry. My understanding is that thus far they haven't produced any information. Also, stop.
Yes, he says they have been working with Michael for a week now.
We should also tell you that the foreign ministry has been busy on several other fronts. Martial law has been imposed in parts of the capital. The foreign ministry has warned foreign journalists that they should obey the government authorities. They should not enter or leave the city, that they are under orders not to do so.
So it's up to us and the foreign ministry to talk to one another. So they
This is
have
Betty Balroor, a CBS consultant, who is presenting our case to the officials from the foreign ministry.
They carry the message to us.
We need to keep this going for a few minutes.
Okay. Well,
我再说一下，要如果我们两个作为代表，你们不清楚的话，那责任应该是你们的那个林奇胜，因为他知道。
While these discussions go on, it's unclear the progress the gentleman from CCTV is making inside the control room. It does seem that this is probably not an argument that people are going to win. On the other hand, CNN had a similar experience about a half an hour ago. And they, in fact, were off the air very, very briefly. They had only audio. Now they have returned to the air. So I suppose it is possible that there could be a breakthrough here, that they could change their minds. On the other hand, the people who are in our hallway are probably not the people who made the decision in the first place. And it appears now, as I glance over to the other screen, that CNN is under in the middle of similar negotiations. So, around the city, as you can see, Dan Rather just arrived.
The satellite division of the Chinese Ministry of Communications, and they're here to tell us that we're being ordered off the air in spite of our agreement with the Chinese Foreign Ministry, which expires at 1 a.m. Sunday morning, Beijing time, that we must cease our satellite transmissions right away. And we know them to be people who have been here with the Chinese PTT, but we've asked that because we had a letter of agreement with the Foreign Ministry, that we should now have a letter of rescinding that agreement, and that we shouldn't just cut off our transmissions simply because somebody comes and tells us orally.
Well, certainly we agree with that. Does anybody speak English, or who is translating?
Betty Bao has been translating for us.
Ah, thank you. Well, first of all, greetings to our colleagues. And I'm sorry this is an awkward situation for you as it is for us. Well, that's happening. Let me explain that we were, until fairly recently, broadcasting live from Tiananmen Square. That was until late mid-morning. Now, at the first time, the camouflage helicopters flew by low over the Tiananmen Square. The first time the helicopters flew by is when we lost our live capability at Tiananmen Square. That's about a 20-25 minute drive from here. This was our main headquarters in Beijing. Now, we stayed in Tiananmen Square hoping that we could get our live capability restored there. While we were trying to do that unsuccessfully, there was a second flyby of the camouflage helicopters. There were 5 the second time around. I think there were 8 the first time around. What they did the second time was pretty much what they did the first time, except they flew lower and they flew slower. The crowd, of course, was very much concerned about what was happening there. They didn't know whether someone was going to drop tear gas or make a landing, but they didn't do any of that. But when it became clear we couldn't get our live capability back up after that second helicopter flyby, at which the leaders of the protest movement in the square thought was an effort by the military to tighten a kind of psychological vice on them while the military continued trying to get their land forces into the square. At that point is when we left Tiananmen Square and came back here to our main headquarters in the Shangri-La Hotel, which, as I say, is about a 25-minute drive. The other thing that has been happening, I don't know whether our friends here were aware of it because they've been having to do their business during the morning, is that we had this incredible videotape, army trucks who were using restraint, the soldiers were, and trying to get through to Tiananmen Square, but neighbors and neighborhood people would come out, the supporters of the main core of protesters in Tiananmen Square. They would come out and surround the army trucks, and this is what you saw and heard, these scenes of rank-and-file Chinese pleading with the young men who are serving in their own army not to go any further. From time to time they'd sing patriotic songs or give them flowers, and those kinds of scenes are going on all over the city. Now, what we have seen coming back, driving from Tiananmen Square to our broadcast headquarters in another part of the city, just driving over this time, is that at almost every intersection there are crowds, but I should emphasize that both the government and the demonstrators have used a great deal of restraint. Now, where there hasn't been restraint is in this pulling the plug on our broadcast. I don't quite know where we stand at the moment here now, but they pulled the plug on us in Tiananmen Square, and these gentlemen are here trying to pull the plug on us at the moment, right here.
They're just messengers.
Yes, and they emphasize that they're just messengers. Betty Bao Lord, who's been helping us here all week long. So, the situation is that the government and the party are making an effort to break the back of the movement for freedom, democracy, and reform. But key to that is getting the original group of student strikers out of Tiananmen Square and up to and including now. They haven't been able to do that, although they are making these low-level helicopter flybys in an effort to, if not scare them out, at least let them know that the armed forces under the direction of the government and the party are trying to do that.
Dan, there are 2 pieces of information that you should know. At 10 o'clock, martial law has been declared. All foreign journalists have been barred from either entering Beijing or from departing from Beijing.
And this follows on another announcement from the government a little earlier in the day that the government would try again tonight, this will be the second night they've tried this, to impose a curfew here in Beijing. This time they're going to try to make it stick beginning at 8 o'clock tonight.
I believe at 9 o'clock.
9 o'clock, correct, and that'd be 9 o'clock Beijing time. But that's the situation here in Beijing. Dan Rather, CBS News. For those who find this hard to follow, welcome to the club. It's a very confusing situation here in China, and it has been deteriorating in terms of confusion over the last 4 to 6 hours, ever since dawn arrived in Tiananmen Square, the center of the protest movement, and the People's Liberation Army had not been able to make its way to the square as the government and the party had wanted it to do, and to shut down the protest demonstration there. In these developments, elements of the People's Liberation Army have continued to try to inch their way toward the square without using violence. I think it's important to say that the Army has engaged in tremendous restraint, as have the supporters of the protest. This is not the kind of situation that we've been seeing, for example, in South Korea. Neither side wants violence. Neither side has had violence, but the Army is trying to maneuver its way, inch its way, wheedle its way to the square to break the back of the protest movement. So far, they haven't been able to do it. So they had those helicopter overflies in hopes of scattering them and scaring them, but that hasn't worked either. Now, we've just been called to the control room. Excuse me, sir, to our Chinese bureaucratic friends who are here to try to shut us down.
We have the pictures that we fed out of there that we want to put on the air.
Right. Now, what you're going to see and hear, we hope, what you're going to see and hear right now, we hope, are videotapes of some of what has been happening this morning. This is the kind of thing they pulled the plug on us in Tiananmen Square. Now, before, these are Army units trying to get to the square. Watch and listen to this. As the people say to the Army, don't do this to your own people. And you can see how uncomfortable the soldiers are. These young Chinese dispatched from outlying provinces into Beijing to move into Tiananmen Square and try to shut down the protest movement. Watch and listen to this. The commander stays in the truck. Commander, at one point, you can see virtually has tears in his eyes, and look at that soldier in the left-hand quadrant of the screen. Now the commander smiles and is forced to shake hands. This kind of scene is happening all around Beijing today. The Army trucks surrounded, and people throw them flowers. This soldier, it's on his face. Is this what I got in the Army to do? Crowds surround the trucks manage to inch forward a little, and then they're stopped again. Now, let's go to another piece of videotape. This is a little while later, actually in Tiananmen Square. What you're going to see are the helicopters come by for the first time. Let's listen to the crowd as they see them. Camouflage military helicopters flying past the Heroes Monument in the middle of Tiananmen Square, over the Great Hall of the People. The crowd doesn't scatter. Some run at the edges, but others shout, shake their fist, and cry derision. Nobody knew at this point, this was the first helicopter flyby, whether they were going to drop tear gas canisters or let troops off or what they were going to do. Now, it was roughly at this point where, despite our agreement, the Foreign Ministry directed the state-operated radio and television to pull the plug on us when that first helicopter flyby was there. As it turned out, the helicopters made a run around the square and they swooped away. That's when the plug got pulled on our live coverage in Tiananmen Square. Now, about 20 minutes later, there was yet another helicopter flyby. Whether it was the same helicopters, nobody could say. But again, this time 5 helicopters. I think there were 8 the first time. 5 helicopters came the second time and swooped down lower at slower speed over the square. The crowd rumbled with talk that they're going to land, they're going to let troops off. They didn't. Again, they finally flew away. We were at that point desperately trying to get back on the air with our live coverage from Tiananmen Square, but it became increasingly apparent that they weren't going to restore our live capability from the square. So that's when we made a run for our main broadcasting facility some 20-25 minutes away in the Hotel Shangri-La. We arrived here to find the people from the state-operated, state-controlled television saying they were only the messengers, but they'd been told by the Foreign Ministry that they were to pull the plug on us here, despite a written agreement well in advance that we would be able to broadcast at least until 1 o'clock this afternoon, Beijing time. Now, a note has just been handed to me, which says, to recap briefly, the government continues trying to crack the back of the core of the protest movement in Tiananmen Square. It has yet been unable to do that. Dan Rather, CBS News, in Beijing, China.
This has been a CBS News special report.
Moderators want to continue the transmission. The hardliners don't. John Sheehan, are you there?
Here, can you hear me, Dan?
Yes, I do, Jack, and glad to have you again. Now, we've reestablished both picture and sound, Jack, and my question was the situation as regards the Army.
Let's try to do it fast this time in case the line goes down again. What we've learned is that the troops surrounding the city are being reinforced in areas in the surrounding countryside closed to foreigners. According to diplomats and intelligence sources, fresh units from the distant provinces have been brought in. Now, those soldiers are being held in isolation. They're being isolated from news of what's going on in the city.
Well, Jack, all of this indicates continuing sharp divisions at the very top of the Chinese leadership.
Well, it certainly does. There haven't been troop movements like this in China since 1979, when the Chinese were building up their forces to go to war with Vietnam. And these troop movements, the reinforcements, could be very ominous, but, Dan, they could also be the military establishment, which is a player in this power game, just positioning itself to move either way, to go forward or to fall back, according to which side wins the power struggle.
Jack, we're all very aware that this changes almost hour to hour, but the current indication is which faction holds the upper hand, the Deng Xiaoping, Li Peng faction, or the Zhao Ziyang faction?
Well, the Chinese people themselves are amazed that Li Peng has not stepped down. So that in itself is an indication that he has found some strong backing.
And among that strong backing now, the flag rank officers, at least most of them, of the Army, Navy, and Air Force.
I didn't quite hear the question. You're saying that he's picked up some backing from high officers. That seems pretty obvious that he has. And I understand that some emissaries have been traveling the countryside trying to drum up military support for the hardline faction in the government.
And to underscore, Jack, Deng Xiaoping has always had strong support in the military and indeed commands at least the upper sections of the military.
Well, Deng Xiaoping has kept one job, and that is chairman of the Central Military Commission, and that gives him a great deal of say. In charge of the Army is the president, Yang Shang-kun, and he's one of the hardliners. He is one of the people who has backed Li Peng to the hilt.
And in Tiananmen Square itself, where the core of the strike, the demonstration, the movement has been centered, what's happening there at the moment?
You know, Dan, there's an almost unbelievable optimism there. They feel that having learned about democracy, that somehow it's going to go their way almost by magic. And to any outside observer, it doesn't seem that way, but the students are telling us today that starting tomorrow, they're going to put up temporary housing in the square.
Jack, has the sense of danger risen any over the last day, day and a half, or remained about the same?
It has in the streets at night. Thousands and thousands of Beijing citizens pour into the streets every night, and they crowd around the intersections. They have hijacked city buses that they pull crosswise across the roads, and they just gather out there ready to make human barricades, if necessary, against the army if it starts to advance. So all these government statements that this is a benevolent martial law and that the troops will never be used to suppress the students, at least the people of Beijing
Excuse
don't
me, Jack,
believe
we've
that
just
for a
lost
minute.
your picture. They've just pulled the plug on Jack Sheehan in Beijing. You can see the effects of that. Our audio was coming over a telephone line. We were still getting a picture transmission, but the picture transmission now, once again, from China has gone out. What a situation there. Satellite transmission, CCTV, that's the state-run, state-operated television ministry in Beijing has put its sign over the transmission from China. Now you're saying, well, you were getting audio out. Yes, we were getting the audio out on a regular telephone line. The first thing, and there it finally goes completely. It just goes to black. So once again, we're off the air in the way of transmissions from China. First they cut the audio. If those of you who've been with us heard that. Now they've cut both the audio and the picture. So once again, television transmissions from China have been cut off. A reminder that the last couple of days, all of those transmissions have come from the building of the Chinese Communications Ministry with soldiers in the building. They decided yesterday, for who knows what reasons, to restore them. They've decided today, for who knows what reasons, to cut them off. We'll have more about this, of course, on tonight's CBS Evening News, and we'll be back with you during the day if developments warrant. In the meantime, Dan Rather with what was for a while Jack Shahan. We'll see you later.
This has been a CBS News special report.
This is Dan Rather, CBS News in Beijing with Betty Bao-Lard. The situation at Tiananmen Square is that the Army continues to try to move in there and crack the back of the protest movement, which is still headquartered there. The Army hasn't been able to do that. They've had several helicopter flybys. When we tried to broadcast the first of the military helicopter flybys, the state-operated television and radio pulled the plug on us there. We quickly came over to this location, which is our headquarters location, where we have our dish that feeds the satellite. This is the basic control for all of our broadcasts. And two gentlemen from the state-operated television and radio are here now.
No, they represent the Telecommunications Bureau.
Yes, Communications Bureau, which has control of television and radio broadcasts out of the country. Now, their argument has been that they have instructions, they're only messengers, that their argument is to shut us down.
They come back with 3 points. They hope that we will cooperate with them by shutting down the machines ourselves. If we do not do it this way, it will influence the future cooperation between their company and CBS. They hope that we will comply, or this will be difficult.
Well, you see the situation. Now, it's important to know that we have in writing an agreement in which we could continue broadcasting. This agreement was made some time ago in writing and was agreed to by, among others, a representative of the Foreign Ministry, that we could continue broadcasting with our own satellite dish through noon, Saturday, New York time. Now, this is a difficult situation for us at CBS News. We've, in good faith, been operating with this written agreement. Our Chinese friends, many of whom have visited in the United States up to now, have helped us in every way they could. They keep emphasizing they have their instructions. And that's where we stand. All of this against the backdrop of Deng Xiaoping and Lin Peng trying to exert authority over the country. And it's clear that they simply couldn't take our coverage, don't want to take our coverage. They shut us down in Tiananmen Square, and they're now trying to shut us down here. What, gentlemen, Betty, if you could tell him, I understand what your problem is, but could we please have it in writing? Yes, we're having some trouble with our Slack here, but Betty, the situation is, since we have an agreement in writing, if he's going to break the agreement, could we have that in writing, please?
Where's the contract?
Here is the contract. This was approved by the Foreign Ministry. This is our faxed copy of our agreement. As you can see, it says 1600 Greenwich Mean Time on Saturday. We have another 12 hours by this written agreement, which was reaffirmed, Betty, within the last 2 weeks.
这个是电视 confirm 的承认嘛，我不是承认，这不是合同，这电视承认嘛。Yeah, the television service confirm information.
Yes.
这是一个电视承认嘛，不是合同。
Original contract.
The original contract, of course, which we can provide to you, but you would understand that our legal department has the original contract. But this is, as you said yourself, I think, a confirmation by telex. This is a confirmation of what the agreement is.
就是说，刚才你刚才说的，有份有权可以终止。就由于，就是说这份报呢，只是一个Interside返回的一个电视证实报。 这个电视正时报呢说你们这个时间是可用。现在呢就是说我们现在并不是说想停止你们的节目，你们的节目剩下的时间的节目可以通过我们地面站来帮助你们发。
They said they're not trying to stop our transmission. They would like to do it by another manner, which is that after we are filmed it, they will do it for us.
Yes, at their location.
Yes.
But that was not the agreement. But I want to emphasize, Betty, and please, this is important. And for those of you just joining us, this is live from Beijing, China, and the effort here is for the government to shut down our own broadcasting by our own satellite dish, which was being done by written agreement, and they're changing that agreement. They pulled the plug on us in Tiananmen Square when we broadcast the helicopters swooping down, the military helicopters swooping low, trying to break up the protest demonstration there, and now these gentlemen are to do the actual act here. Betty, it's very important to emphasize, and please, that we're a guest in this country. I respect their country, and I respect the authority of their government. I hope they will understand when I say we have a written agreement with their government that we can do this broadcast and continue to do it through tomorrow, and I respectfully hope that he would consider that.
我们完全明白，特别是我们是中国的客人在这儿，他很尊重中国的政府，中国的人民，但是呢，现在问题在哪儿呢？是他们合同是这么说的，现在我们就听你们的口头消息。这是太影响了他。
I can get InfoSet on the phone right now in Washington, D.C. They have the legal document that was signed by Chinese officials and by U.S. officials. I called them up about an hour ago. They said we were legally in the right to continue broadcasting until midnight Beijing time. If they want, I'll get them on the phone right now. We'll go up on the satellite right here.
That might be helpful, but I think the main point we have, Betty, is that we have an agreement in writing, and I hope he will understand that I would not feel comfortable in ending the broadcast until I had something in writing, because I have only his vocal word of this.
做这个很大的这个很有影响的事。
根据这个电视正时报，它的内容应该是戈尔巴乔夫访问。现在戈尔巴乔夫已经访问结束，所以呢，这个电视项目可以结束，剩下的你们的节目，我们不是不让你传，而是通过我们的地面站可以帮助你传，请你明白。
He said that the purpose of this contract was for us to report the Gorbachev trip. And since the Gorbachev trip is over, and anything that's left over, he would be glad to help us to transmit it.
Respectfully, I know that he's an intelligent gentleman, and he understands, and we understand that that's not what is issue here, because we specifically said that if we're going to bring the CBS evening news to China, we need to be able to broadcast for the full week, and we would need to broadcast for the time after Gorbachev left. Not only was it agreed to in writing, but it was reaffirmed just last week. And since we have something in writing, I do respectfully request that he give us something in writing in return.
你也知道，这个国不在访华的时候是一部分，第二部分呢是说是7天，这个7天现在我们还没有到第7天，这个问题，他是非常尊重您那个任务，但是这个他不可能就是答应你的要求，就是口头消息。
现在呢，就是根据这份报，只是Intersat的一个信道可用正式报，并不是它的。
For those of you who just joined us, the gentleman is trying to explain.
It is not the contract, he says.
I respect his position and the authority of his government, and I can't physically and won't physically prevent him from doing what he has to do. But please. So he has to do what he has to do, but I do protest in the most respectful manner.
这跟Intersat没关系，因为你们的这个信道是可用的，没有重新申请，我们没必要再跟Intersat重新再打交道。
They don't have to deal with Intersat. 为什么你不愿意跟他们说话？
请你给我这个。
好。
Intersat给的时间是现在还没有超过Intersat给的时间，我没必要再跟Intersat再重新申请时间。
He says that according to this, we haven't gone beyond the stated times agreed with Intersat. So until we go beyond that, he has no reason to get in touch with Intercept.
I realize he doesn't want to talk with Intercept because they're going to support our position, but to say, I don't want to be disrespectful, and I can only say that he must do what he must do, but I want him to understand that I respectfully protest as strongly as I can, particularly since he doesn't have anything in writing to break a written agreement.
现在问题是什么呢？就是口头消息，假如你要干，必须要干，这个当然了，我们也没有办法。但是这个问题是在这儿呢，就是说，至少还是口头消息。我们签的这个。
While this goes on, correspondent Susan Spencer has pictures. These are the first pictures we've had of demonstrators clashing with police, not with the army, we think, but with police. Here's Susan Spencer.
This happened at an intersection not too far from our CBS headquarters. It may indicate some reason why the Chinese have decided that they don't want us to continue broadcasting from here. There were students who were blocking an overpass, as we understand. When we got there had been pushing and shoving, as you can see there, for some time. And then, as you see, the police take out nightsticks, and they aren't showing much mercy as they try to get the students away from this intersection. This happened, I believe, within the last hour or so. The students clearly hadn't expected this at all. As you said earlier, you're correct. This is not the People's Liberation Army. These were the police, not generally very highly regarded by the populace, and clearly they have decided that at this point force is not something that they are going to avoid. They push the students, trying to get them out of the intersection, trying to get them back on the bus. This, as we said, took place after 3 or 4 attempts by the students to get by the police line. We are around the city. It's unclear whether or not incidents of this sort are going on anywhere else, but as we have covered this event, as you pointed out earlier, there hasn't been this sort of confrontation. And so this in itself is disturbingly significant. You can see there that one of the protesters seemed to grab the policeman's glasses, and this was clearly very serious. Dan?
The question continues to be here in Beijing whether the center will hold, whether the central authority will hold, that the city has not descended into chaos, it has not descended into anarchy, but it's getting rougher, as you just saw in those videotapes, and we're just told that the government has issued a new instruction, a new decree for all foreign journalists. The foreign journalists are not to disseminate any information out here from this country that would be harmful to the country, and all kinds of controls have suddenly been placed on where journalists can and cannot go. They can't go to factories, they can't go to schools. All of this is brand new, it's just happening now, and our negotiations with these gentlemen continue to see if we can continue to broadcast at all. They've already shut us down our live coverage from Tiananmen Square. Now they're trying to shut us down from our own satellite dish in Beijing. This, as Deng Xiaoping and Li Peng, his #1 right-hand man, have made their decision to go with the hardliners. They're trying to break the back of the protest movement, and they don't want the kind of coverage that they have had. These gentlemen are in the process here of trying to shut us down. This is Dan Rather with Susan Spencer in Beijing. We'll try to stay on top of events for you. Stay tuned to this CBS station.